turn it over and start to introduce our presenter today. Such a timely topic. We're so excited to have Linda Graham with us here. She's an experienced psychotherapist and resilience coach locally here in Corte Madera. And she integrates modern neuroscience, mindfulness, relational psychology into her national and international trainings. And she is the author of the book, Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster, as well as the award-winning book, Bouncing Back, Rewiring Your Brain for Maximum Resilience and Well-Being. And she also has 10 years worth of weekly resources for recovering resilience that are archived on her website. That's lindagraham-mft.net. And we'll link to all this in a follow-up email. You'll have access to all this as well. But yeah, with that, Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think I accidentally muted you, so feel free to unmute yourself, Linda, and I'm going to stop my share and you should take on over.
So thank you, Adam. Very happy to be with everyone here today. And actually, I've been watching the names of the participants coming in. And there are colleagues on this call that I have had a lot of esteem and respect for many, many years. So appreciate you all being here today. I've been asked to speak to how we as clinicians can help our clients recover and strengthen their resilience, even how we can strengthen our own in these times of the ongoing dangers and the uncertainties of the coronavirus pandemic. In these times of the large-scale reawakening to the devastation of racial injustice and social and economic inequity in our larger world, and the growing awareness of the white privilege and the history and ongoingness of that devastation, expanding our awareness of the discrimination faced daily by women and members of the LGBTQ community, and the continued prejudice against people's religious affinities, the othering of people with disabilities. So Pat Saunders informed me of the major goof we made scheduling this presentation on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. It marks the beginning of the holiest days of the year in the Jewish tradition. Unconscious, unaware. And in the second and third sections of this webinar, I'll speak more directly to how even good people with the best of intentions can not know, or know and forget. Forget and not track the history and the traditions and the values of other cultures, even of our own culture. And truly more on that directly in a few moments. I do know something about resilience. I've studied and written and taught about recovering and strengthening our resilience for more than a decade. And I'm passionate about helping clients cope more skillfully, more effectively with the challenges and crises of their lives, and try to provide the practices and strategies that will help them help us as well to cope with any level of disruption and adversity, from a series of small annoyances to the troubles and tragedies that break our hearts and sometimes break our spirits, to the utter catastrophes that can change our lives forever. I do deeply believe that that work is the heart of the therapeutic process. And that work, strengthening our resilience, foundational to our mental health and well-being. That underlies whatever theoretical orientation or modality we might use to help our clients respond to those stressors more effectively. And for 25 years, I've been comfortable in my Eurocentric bubble of my paradigms: psychotherapy and trauma therapy, mindfulness and compassion practice, neuroscience, and the science underlying how we can help clients literally rewire their habitual patterns of response to life events in ways that are safe and efficient and effective. The confluence of those three paradigms was enough to keep me learning forever, and was effective enough in helping my clients individually heal and learn and grow, moving from stress and trauma through recovering strengths and developing new perspectives, new patterns of response to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to genuine well-being and thriving and flourishing. And now it seems that's no longer enough. What we're coping with day by day, what our clients are coping with day by day, what we're seeing on the news day by day, how the paradigms of making sense of the world we live in and the rules of those paradigms shift under our feet day by day. And that means we need to stretch our understanding of resilience into something new, into different mindsets, evolving new understandings, new vocabularies, new strengths, and new methods. So 20 years ago, I was in a training on attachment conditioning with David Wallen, who wrote the text on attachment in psychotherapy. And David was showing video clips of the various attachment styles. And I was following along going, yeah, I can see why that's a problem, or yeah, that one. And then he showed a clip of someone with an avoidant attachment style. And I noticed that I said to myself, well, what's wrong with that? That was my family. And we're waking up to the conditioning that we've all had about race and class and gender. Well, what's wrong with that? That was my family, or that's my culture, or that's what everybody thinks. And this waking up or reawakening is not easy. The American writer Pearl S. Buck said, you can judge your age by the amount of pain you feel when you come in contact with a new idea. And I'm getting older in this field. I can acknowledge my pain, my discomfort, feeling bombarded by so many new ideas, new questions, new possibilities. Also just the risks inherent in change, in needing to stretch and grow. So I've spent much of my time since the orders for shutdown in mid-March and the death of George Floyd at the end of May, reading books and articles, listening to podcasts, watching webinars, talking with colleagues, to learn from experts far more knowledgeable and visionary than I, to learn what the new dots even are, and how to connect them in ways that will allow me to develop my own resilience mindset, deepen my own moral compass, and help me guide my clients in their coping, in their choices of response, as parents, as providers for their families, as responsible citizens navigating an unsettled and polarized world. This process has been so humbling. And I don't have the answers. I'm trying to find the right questions. And I hope to share some of these questions with you over the next 2 hours. So this gathering is being held online by Zoom, rather than in person in a large room where we could greet and meet and mingle and catch up with our colleagues that are coping with the tsunami of these changes that we're all being asked to cope with, sharing our stories of worry and woe, as well as the good news that we would like to have reflected back to us by the people we care about and we know care about us. And many of us may already be zoomed out by meeting with clients online day after day, week after week. Even zooming hour after hour creates fatigue in the body and fog in the brain. We need to get up and move around and stretch, get some fresh air, which we have today, to refresh ourselves for the next client and the next and the next. So I'm organizing this presentation to include time for Q&A and discussion among ourselves as we go along. There'll be 4 sections, approximately 20 minutes each for each 2-hour webinar, for a 2-hour webinar total, where I'll present some concepts, some research, some practices and strategies, some questions, and then hopefully about 10 minutes for Q&A and discussion, then another section of presentation, followed by another Q&A, etc. Please do type your questions into the chat box for Adam to read, or think of your questions if you want to raise your electronic hand, if you want Adam to bring you live into the session. And you will receive a bibliography of references from Adam by email after the webinar. It is not at all definitive or comprehensive. It's just the deep end of the pool that I've been diving in for these last many months. So that hopefully we come away from this gathering with an expanded vision of our work with clients. And with it, if not a lot of answers, better questions about how to move forward. So the first section focuses on resilience, how definitions in the behavioral sciences have evolved in the last 40 years, and how the emerging understandings of the process of recovering resilience can help us help our clients more effectively now, even as the external stressors and our awareness of the impact of those stressors evolves. Second, the unique impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on resilience, our clients and our own, and the importance of cultivating, a resilience mindset to deal with the threats to health and well-being that are not going away anytime soon. And third, the large-scale reawakening of awareness of the reality of the long-standing racial injustice, social and economic inequity, the inevitability and intersectionality of so much othering and oppression in our society, and strengthening the moral compass for our clients and for ourselves that would support engaging with those larger issues with integrity, empowerment, and hope. And then fourth, strengthening the capacities of responsibility to engage with any of these threats of well-being, any of these threats to well-being for ourselves, our clients, to everyone we share our common humanity with wisdom and clarity and courage and integrity, stretching into resilience beyond the individual self, to resilience of the very fabric of our society. So the first section on resilience. 40 years ago, Salvador Mati, who was a psychologist at the University of Chicago, researched the long-term impacts of stress on employees at the Illinois Bell Telephone Company. It turns out, at a time when, due to changes in government regulations, the company laid off half of its workforce. So that was quite a laboratory to study stress resilience. And though not distinguishing categories of race or gender or class, as researchers pay more attention to now, Mati came to name the collection of attitudes and coping strategies that work the best as stress hardiness. It's a good place to start. 30 years ago, researchers in post-traumatic growth, pioneered by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, interviewed hundreds of survivors of all kinds of stress and trauma. Survivors of plane crashes, being detained in a prisoner of war camp or a refugee camp, losing a child in a car accident, victims of physical or sexual abuse, victims of a natural disaster like a flood or a hurricane. So there would have been much more diversity in the demographics there. And they focused on identifying the qualities that would allow people to fully recover from severe trauma. And the average number of trauma that the research subjects had experienced was 8. So what does allow any person or even a group of people to transform any adversity into learning and growth, post-traumatic growth, focusing not just on bouncing back from tragedy and trauma, but bouncing forward, transforming bad breaks into breakthroughs, as my friend and colleague Michaela Haas wrote in her 2016 book on resilience. Last week, I read in a paper presenting research in 2014 by Rachel Yehuda, director of the Traumatic Stress Studies Division at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, that people can experience symptoms of PTSD and be very resilient in other aspects of their lives at the same time. So post-traumatic growth researchers are looking for ways to emphasize that trauma survivors can recover from trauma and be resilient simultaneously. We'll explore this bouncing forward a bit more in segment 2 of the webinar, dealing with the pandemic. What Kelly McGonigal, who's a health psychologist at Stanford University, calls the courage to grow from stress. 20 years ago, Martin Seligman shifted the focus of the American Psychological Association from the traditional focus on mental illness and psychopathology to mental health and positive psychology, focusing on strengths, virtues, competencies, hallmarks not only of happiness, but also of resilience. And 6 years ago, the APA developed this official definition of resilience. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. What is most helpful about that definition is that it focuses on the shift, What's most helpful about that definition is that it shifts the focus on resilience from traits to the process of adapting well. from nouns to verbs, which is more accurate and more helpful to us as clinicians. Another framework helpful in framing our exploration of our clients' resilience, identified by Csikszentmihalyi in FLOW, the psychology of optimal experience, is 3 factors: the severity of the external stressors, the strength of external resources, and the strength of internal resources. So as therapists and trauma therapists, we know that different people respond to different stressors differently, and that the same person can respond to different stressors differently depending on their external and internal resources of the moment that may change over time. And in general, it's very different dealing with a fender bender than being involved in a car accident where we're injured than causing the death of a child in a car accident. And increasingly, researchers are documenting and clinicians are paying attention to the multi-generational transmission of trauma, the powerful influence of social, racial, and economic context, and the conditioning of early life experiences. So the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, conducted by the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente in the late 1990s here in California, did demonstrate the impact of 10 different environmental stressors: emotional or physical neglect, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, violence against the mother, substance abuse in the household, living with family members who are mentally ill, suicidal, or who had been in prison, on an individual's resilience and capacities to deal with trauma as they grew older. The demographic factors of race and gender were carefully tracked. 75% of the participants were white, 16% were Hispanic, now Latinx, and 8% were Black, now African American. The number and severity of stressors did factor in the outcome, that women and racial or ethnic minorities were at a greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. And the more ACEs and the longer they were repeated, that led to more disrupted neurodevelopment, social, emotional, cognitive impairment, more disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. And while the severity of the external stressor is a factor at any time, the strength of the external resources is a factor, especially in these times. Does your client have their health or health insurance or not? Do they have savings in the bank, or are they unemployed and living on their savings now? Are they at risk of losing their job or their home? Do they have a supportive family and community for refuge and resourcing, or were they already isolated even before this pandemic started? Do they have a religious faith or spiritual practice that will help them sustain faith and hope? Researchers are beginning to identify that individual resilience is embedded in the resilience of the larger community, the larger culture itself. Our work here around external resources may lean a little bit more into case management, and I'll address that a little bit more in section 2 on the pandemic. We do pay attention to those external stressors and resources and help clients pay attention to them. But most important for us as counselors and psychotherapists, we help clients focus on and claim their inner resources, their inner strengths. Clients may already know some of those strengths. They may be aware of them before we are. They may be discovering them as they shift to homeschooling their children or creating a memorial service on Zoom. But they may experience that some of their strengths have gone missing. They may also be struggling with anxiety or fear or anger, numbing out or withdrawal, pretty common responses of the nervous system to danger and life threat. And we help clients come back to their baseline equilibrium, their range of resilience, so they can respond to the challenges of these challenging times and circumstances skillfully, effectively, and wisely. And we'll focus just on helping clients identify those strengths in just a moment. The final piece of research in the 1990s that is radically revising our views of resilience is the discovery of modern neuroscience, of the proven beyond irrefutability of the neuroplasticity innate in every human being. Every human brain is capable of growth and change, lifelong. The brain learns from experience. Any experience, every experience, positive or negative, causes neurons in the brain to fire, to exchange information through electrical and chemical signals. When you repeat the experience, you repeat the neural firing. And neurons that fire together, wire together. With enough repetition, the brain creates new circuitry, installing new responses and new patterns of response to life events in the brain. So neuroplasticity is what allows us as clinicians to help clients install new, more adaptive strategies of coping in their repertoire of resilience. It's what allows clients to rewire previous patterns of coping that don't work so well, the basis of all trauma therapy. And when we know how to help clients harness that neuroplasticity, we can help them develop more resilience in ways that are safe and efficient and effective. So I love sharing this quote from Richard Davidson, who's the founder of the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The brain is shaped by experience, and based upon everything we know about the brain and neuroscience, change is not only possible, but it's actually the rule rather than the exception. It's really just a question of which influences we're going to choose for the brain. And because we have a choice about what experiences we want to use to shape our brain, we have a responsibility to choose the experiences that will shape the brain toward the wise and the wholesome. So part of that responsibility of choosing, part of the process, the verb of resilience, is to understand that response flexibility, cultivating the brain's capacities to make choices and respond differently than we have in the past, is a central tenet of resilience. As my colleague Frankie Perez says, how you respond to the issue is the issue. And we help our clients change their perceptions of the stressors they're facing and the perception of the strength of their strength to help them respond more flexibly to any adversity, trauma, tragedy, threat, or significant source of stress. Thanks to the neuroplasticity innate in the human brain, resilience is our client's birthright, and it is learnable and trainable. And part of our work with clients right now is to help them feel empowered, to make those choices, to take wise action, to cope resiliently with the current stressors and adversities, no matter how severe or chronic. When I teach clients and clinicians about recovering resilience, I teach practices and tools that develop resilience in the same way that the brain develops resilience, from the bottom up and the inside out. Body-based tools of somatic intelligence, tools of emotional intelligence to manage disruptive emotions and cultivate the positive emotions that shift the functioning of the brain to be more resilient. Relational intelligence within ourselves and with others. Reflective intelligence to see clearly, discern options, and make wise choices. That's the trajectory and the curriculum that I offer in the book Resilience. I look for their capacities to be flexible, to learn and grow. And of course, I listen for what is disrupting or derailing their capacities, but I start with listening for examples of their experiences when they've already been resilient. I look for the strengths and capacities they already have and help make those strengths and capacities of resilience visible to them. I will lead them through an exercise to identify traits of resilience they already have, from, yes, a list of traits, but also to identify moments when they've exhibited those traits, and to gather together symbols or mementos of those moments and create a resilience reminder on a bookshelf or on their desk or on the kitchen counter, where they can regularly resource themselves with the memories when they've already been resilient. And I will ask them to look at their mementos and revisit those moments of already being resilient every day for 30 days. And there's no magic number in neuroscience of repeating something every day for 30 days, but it's the repetition that rewires the brain. And doing something once a day for 30 days is an easy way to remember to do it. And over time, clients will rewire their sense of self as being resilient. So as we move toward our first break for discussion and Q&A, I would ask you to take a moment to reflect on the question: how do you work with your clients to help them discover their strengths, identify when they've already been resilient, claim their capacities to be resilient, to counter the negativity bias we all have as human beings innate in our brains, thanks to evolution, and to dismiss that capacity to dismiss or devalue our strengths, but also not to do a Pollyanna bypass, to help clients come to some realistic assessment and realistic optimism about their resilience and their choice of response to the issues. So we have about 10 minutes, I hope, for discussion and Q&As, and any comments or insights from your own experience.